Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Scrubbed In Show. I hope you've all been keeping well. This week we have with us another amazing guest. We have with us Dr. Farzana, who is a consultant radiologist and the CEO and co-founder of HexaRad, who is doing wonderful and incredible things. It's a massive, massive pleasure to have you on the show today, Farzana. How are you?
Welcome to the show. Yeah, thank you for having me.
No, so if people were to search you, they would see you've done many wonderful things, had a very diverse career. At one point, you were even a surgical trainee, and then we're going to dive into that a bit later, and then obviously turn to radiology. But we want to take it all the way back to the very beginning, a young Farzana who's embarking on this journey to pursue medicine and become a doctor. So tell us about that bit when you kind of decided you wanted to be a doctor.
Yeah, sure. So my parents, like many others, are immigrants. They're from Bangladesh. They came to the UK in the 70s. And came with nothing, a very kind of immigrant story. So when I was born, we used to live in a bedsit. We had, we didn't have central heating, we had a heater. And they always, I think, a few things, they always worked really, really hard. They had really big dreams. So, they worked hard, built a life for themselves. And so I think from a young age, I really learned from them the importance of, I think, thinking big, solving problems, working really, really hard. And then when I got to, A-levels, medicine seemed like quite a natural career. I liked science, didn't really want to do a science degree. And my parents weren't doctors, but my grandfather in Bangladesh had been a doctor as well. So, so that was always kind of in the family. So I embarked on medicine after work experience, shadowing an anaesthetist. And I think one of the first operations I saw was a TURP, which left me quite hard. I was like 16, and I remember the anaesthetist was like, he was talking about diathermy, and he was like, it just smells like a kebab. And I couldn't eat kebabs for like 3 years after that. So anyway, I just again applied for medicine, and I did, and I started at Guy's, which is was kind of UMDF, but became King's.
Shout out King's. That's where we trained.
Did you do dissection in Boland?
Yeah.
Where did you do dissection? It wasn't in Boland House, actually.
It was in Hodgkins.
Hodgkins, that's it.
Hodgkins.
Yeah.
I think King's was like famous for like the real anatomy, the real dissections, because a lot of medical schools did pro sections, or like they did like fake models.
Yeah.
I still remember like that formaldehyde, that burning, stinging sensation in your eyes. But it's an experience to say the least, for sure.
Exactly, and that smell. Even if you talk about it now, you can still smell it.
Yeah.
Like, it's so like it was, but it was really good. Yeah.
Walk us through medical school. Walk us through what it was like, the challenges, the highs, the lows. Medical school is so many years that we spend in our lives, right? And different students have different exposures, different moments that are memorable. Walk us through medical school.
Yeah, medical school was good. So I really enjoyed it. I, made some really good friends, had a lot of fun. But when I got to medical school, I felt like I was really out of my depth. And I think that happens for a lot of medical students when you start medical school. You're used to being, academically proficient. And then you get to medical school and you're suddenly surrounded by lots of really, really clever people. So I remember feeling quite intimidated, and just thinking, God, people are so clever. I'm not as clever as them. And I think that was my overwhelming memory, certainly for like the first couple of years. I think that's very common for women. I see it when, when I became a consultant and I'd see like radiology trainees come through. I really recognised that when I saw like young female trainees who would just be like, I don't know enough. So that was my thing. I was like, I don't know enough. I'm not doing enough. That was certainly when I started medical school. And then when we moved on to clinical work, that was a lot more interesting. I found the preclinical work, like the Krebs cycle, I just could not find it interesting, and which felt like all we did was Krebs cycle. But as soon as we got to clinical medicine, then I actually found it really interesting. Had some brilliant teachers. And yeah, was at Guy's a lot, St Thomas's, and then did a little bit of stuff at King's as well. And really, really enjoyed the clinical side of things. And I think I eased into feeling a bit more like I had chosen the right path when I got to that point in med school.
Definitely.
Amazing.
Tell us now, looking back in hindsight, what advice would you give to young girls then in particular that may come from immigrant backgrounds or may come from a household where the parents may not be as educated and you do feel a bit overwhelmed and out of depth, what advice would you give to them? Because we always hear it, but I think it's nice to kind of share your experience of what you can advise to them.
Yeah, I think it's that thing, like imposter syndrome. And I really had that when I was younger, and I don't have it anymore. And that's just because I realised I deserve to be there. And I think that's what I didn't have when I was younger. And I think about, and I think, I'm sure you guys have this when you think about how hard your parents work, like the racism they faced. My parents, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. Like that's when, they would have this threat of violence. And so when I remember everything that my family went through, then you just think, of course, I deserve to be here. And I think, feeling that the hopes of all the people before you who worked as hard as they did to get you where you are, I think for me, that stops me with imposter syndrome completely. So that's a little different to, just feel like you deserve to be there. I think of course you do. You've worked hard and, fake it till you make it. If you're still not confident, just fake it till you make it.
I'm glad you mentioned that. You do deserve to get it because it is a hard graft getting into med school, sitting those exams, and then to kind of say it like you deserve it, all the sacrifices you've made and your family have made for you to be where you are. I think that kind of puts things into perspective. So yeah, I do agree with that and resonate with that actually.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a story with a lot of people, and I think it's not not just if you're a young woman. I think it's just with everyone, and that's one of the things that so we have a scholarship that we started at HexaRad, which we can talk about later. But really, it is about recognizing people, for the value that they bring, and that people from different backgrounds bring so much stuff to medicine, and just making sure that everyone is at that same starting line, because not everyone. And I think even in medical school, there's lots of data about widening participation after you graduate, specialties, the glass ceiling that exists in hospital management still today. When you look at the number of doctors and you look at who's actually who are the CEOs, who are the people making decisions. So it's certainly not a problem that we've fixed yet.
Has the environment become more supportive for females in particular? Because it's been many years now. We're in 2022. We're seeing so many programs and campaigns and different, projects pop up where they're supporting females in certain things where they're not getting certain support. Has it really changed, or are they just sort of covers and plasters over the cracks?
I think it definitely has changed for women, yeah, for sure. So my first boss when I became a house officer was a surgeon, and she was one of the first female general surgeons. And she said that when she applied to medical school, there were quotas for women.
Oh, wow.
The limit. And so I think since then, I think things have definitely really improved. But I think there is still, there's a disproportionate number of people who went to private school. There are barriers to people from different backgrounds, races, disabilities. But yeah, I do think things have definitely improved for women.
No, definitely. Amazing. And we hope things do continue to improve. Having gone through medical school, kind of getting over this imposter syndrome, realizing that you deserve to be here, and kind of taking it in your stride and making the most out of medical school. Tell us a bit more about foundation training, house officer, senior house officer. You mentioned that, you probably did a surgical rotation. How was that experience?
Yeah, I loved working. So I loved my, it was F1. I think the first year where it was called F1.
Okay.
2005. And I loved it. It was really good. I had a brilliant cohort of people. I did my house job at Lewisham Hospital. So that was F1, and then F2 I was at King's. And both of them were really good. I just had the best bosses. And it was at the time when we still had, I think I did a band 3 rota in one of my jobs. So it was difficult hours. But I think what's really difficult for junior doctors now is that you don't have that continuity of team. So we worked really long hours, but so did everyone on our team. So, after each firm, I remember we'd get taken out for dinner. Our bosses would buy us presents. They were just so nice. Really common. And when I speak to junior doctors now, they just look at me like, that's never happened to us.
Yeah.
They were in a lift and their boss did their name. But that made it, actually made it really fun. So we worked hard, but I really, really enjoyed those first 2 years.
Yeah, I think
amazing.
I remember speaking to a lot of senior colleagues, and they said, like you mentioned, the hours are hard, the job was tough, but there was a sense of unity and everyone in it together.
Yeah.
And kind of were stuck with the same firm. I think it was called back then, and you kind of got through it. And it was a little stuff, buying coffee, going out for dinner and lunch and sitting together as a team, which I think is so different to how it is now, where junior doctors kind of, they have their own little clique, and then the regists do their own thing, and the consultants are kind of never to be seen, right? And there's that disunity, and, you know, consultants are missing half the time, stuff. And I do think maybe a lot of the difficulties junior doctors face, obviously there's other issues, is that team morale that we don't have, like I'm sure you had before.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, when in my first job, we got like a printout from the secretary of our rota, and I remember at like 11 o'clock on one of the days, it said coffee with the consultant. And it was
just amazing,
right? And I remember just being like, "What does this mean?" and then in the rota, so it was in her like job. It was a standing appointment; no patients could be booked then. And then we would just go, and like she would buy coffee for the whole team, and we would then sit and have to make chit chat. And you know, I remember in the beginning just finding the whole thing a little bit awkward. But actually, it really helped because you had this one-on-one time. And when I remember the biggest mistake I made when I was a house officer, I missed a blood result for a patient who ended up getting really sick. And I was really upset about it. And I remember my boss, he just called me into her office. She made me a cup of coffee. She had a coffee machine. She sat down, she was like, have a biscuit. And then we just had a chat. And I think those are the things. I didn't realize then, like, how lucky I was to be part of a cohort of doctors that had that experience, because it doesn't sound to me, I don't know what about you guys, like what it was like when you started, but it doesn't sound like that's what the junior doctor experience is now.
Yeah. So two things. When junior doctors get rotas now, instead of coffee, there's loads of gaps. So you're already thinking, crap, how am I going to do something cool by myself? And the second thing is still, it'd be wrong for us to say that it doesn't happen. There are still rotations where there is that team unity and you kind of look after each other, and the registers do buy lunch and breakfast. And I had it in my first rotation as a surgeon. But when you were talking about this, the one thing that came to my mind I wanted to ask was, when you come from kind of an ethnic minority or a background that isn't so educated or financially well off, I've had people say to me they feel intimidated when they are speaking to consultants or their other counterparts, because they don't feel they're good enough. Despite getting through med school, you know, people like, the way I speak English is funny, I've got an accent. So you're obviously a consultant radiologist. What advice would you give to those people that do feel a bit overwhelmed and nerve-wracking to have those conversations and this kind of coffee with consultants or seniors?
It's completely understandable if you feel intimidated. That's really normal. But make yourself have those conversations. It is really important. The more you have them, the less intimidated that you will feel. And, you know, I learned that from my dad, who, you know, came and he, you know, built himself up. He, you know, got a good job, built his own practice. He's a kind of in finance, he's an accountant. And I just saw from him, he just went for it. And I think that's the thing, is if you're not at the table, you will not be part of the conversation. So just elbow your way in, do it, sit there. And if you think people are judging you on your accent, so what? Like, you know, like your accent is just a sign of where you grew up and what you've been through. You know, just wear it with pride. I think it's when people feel shame, when they feel there is shame about it, shame about your background, or just shame that you're somehow not good enough, or you didn't go on skiing holidays when you were a kid. Like, you know, who cares? Like, you know, just get at the table, and whatever feels uncomfortable, and I've certainly learned this, whatever feels uncomfortable, push yourself to do it. Like, you know, if it's in that uncomfortable space that you grow.
I wanted to ask a little bit about, so you mentioned making a mistake as an F1. So we're in October now, where some of the F1s have embedded within the teams quite well. And I've had that experience as well. And I think every F1, every doctor of every grade will have that experience. Can you tell us a little bit about how you deal with clinical mistakes? What's the important thing to reflect on? Because when I made a mistake, I know it ruined my confidence for quite some time. And it took one of my senior mentors to sit me down and say, look, this happens. And it took a little bit of coaching, essentially, to get my confidence back to the levels that I have now, I'd say. But yeah, walk us through what it felt like and your process to sort of looking after the confidence levels, your clinical sort of confidence as well.
Yeah, I mean, at the time I felt like terrible. Honestly, it felt like my world had ended, because like the patient was really sick. And I hadn't spotted it. So it's not like my husband's a lawyer. He makes a mistake, like, you know, this was an actual mistake. I wouldn't let someone at the end So a few things, and I'm not sure I really did cope with it that well when I was a junior doctor. I remember I cried, and it was my boss who sat me down and gave me some perspective. But I would say now, having, it's been a long time since then, I would say, first of all, if you feel bad, it shows you're human, and that's a good thing, and we should nurture that in doctors. It means that we care, and so that's a good thing. And if you get to the point where you're making mistakes that affect patients and you don't feel bad, that's when you should really, really worry. So I think it's completely normal to feel bad. I think give yourself some space, let yourself feel the emotions you feel, but don't let I think sometimes those ugly voices can rear up, the ones that you've always, your inner critic, where you're always talking about, you're just not good enough, you're this, you've made this, where you're catastrophizing things. I think it's time to just rein that in. And in medicine, you just make mistakes. I'm a radiologist now, so when we make mistakes, it's documented on our records for everybody to see that we missed something, or something wasn't there. So you just have to understand that that's part of the process, and that from each time you learn. So from mistakes probably have made me a much better doctor than I would have been. And that's not to say that we practice in that way, but you always remember your mistakes. Like now I'm talking to you guys, that happened to me in 2005. I could not tell you about the other patients who I did a good job on, but I remember that patient's name. I remember it so clearly, and it impacted my whole practice going forward. So just, this is just part of being a doctor. Don't get in your head too much. So just, and find support as well. Senior doctors, everyone's made a mistake. So find someone who, as you said, Ams, like, talk to somebody if you're feeling overwhelmed.
Absolutely.
And I think what you mentioned about human nature is always to remember the negative, the bad things in our lives. We never remember the good things, right? We remember the exams we failed, the things we forgot, the mistakes we made. And I think I was really somewhere, if you take a step back and look at the things you did do well, did do right, that is a good way to get that burst of confidence that you may start lacking post errors and mistakes. Kind of moving on from foundation training, I saw you did a stint as a surgical trainee before going into radiology. So tell us a bit more about that phase of your life.
Yeah, sure. So I was caught up in something called MTAS, which you guys probably don't remember. A long time ago. It was 2007, something like that. And so this was the first iteration of run-through training, where before that you would basically apply for jobs, then you'd do like A&E, and then you'd eventually apply for a training number. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do in MTAS. But I kind of knew I didn't want to do medicine. I wasn't really sure about GP, and I just didn't consider any of these other specialties. I went to surgery, and I didn't get a job in MTAS. And I honestly felt like my world had ended. It was the first time I didn't get like a job, or, I hadn't done anything. It's fine. It's medicine. I mean, obviously you got jobs before, but I remember just feeling like such a failure, just thinking, I didn't get this job. My career is over. I mean, it was nonsensical. I was 26. But at the time, it was a bit of a mess. Anyone from the MTAS fiasco remembers that, there was no oversight. People lost your applications. The whole thing was a real big mess. So I ended up taking whatever job I could, which was a surgical, just a rotation, and then I just took a step back and thought, well, what do I actually want to do? So at the time, it felt like it was the worst thing in the world, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because for the first time, I just took stock. I for a long time, I think, especially in medical school, you kind of go with the crowd, right? Like everyone is doing the same thing. You're doing it for a really long time. You're almost on this factory where you're just going through and following the motions. And along the way, you're just ranked along everybody else, right? So they're like, you're number 30 out of 300 and whatever. So actually, through MTAS, it just gave me the opportunity to think, okay, what do I want to do? I thought, well, radiology looked quite interesting. And it also just gave me confidence, because if you told me before MTAS, what's the worst thing that could happen, it would be that I didn't get a job. And anyway, then the worst thing happened, and I was okay. It was fine. I didn't get a job, but it was all right. And that was just such a valuable experience for me, because I started to stop being scared of rejection and failure. It just changed my mindset completely. And then it just meant that I just started going for things a lot more. So that's when I decided to apply for radiology. I got into radiology, and that's when I started.
What was the vibes and energy around radiology during that time? Because right now it is really popping off amongst the trainees. We're seeing people flying into radiology. What was it like when you were applying and transitioning over?
It was was a relatively competitive specialty to get into. So so I remember being really nervous that, you know, I didn't have the right CV, all of that stuff. But it was kind of started gaining traction, gaining popularity. People like me who'd been like, hadn't really thought about what they wanted to do, but didn't really think they wanted to do primary care. So yeah, it started getting more popular, and everyone was talking about interventional radiology. So that's the thing.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to be an interventional radiologist. Obviously, I wasn't. After 6 months, I decided, the first 6 months of radiology, like, no, I don't want to do intervention. But that was a time when intervention was really like kicking off. I was like, oh, so cool. So it was a relatively popular specialty. But like everything in medicine, whatever you do, there's always going to be someone who's going to say to you, you know, that's really hard, or that's really competitive. It's just very standard. So I think I would just say, whatever you're doing, just like medics do like to rile each other up in that way. They're like, that's really hard. That job is going to be really hard to get. Just ignore it. Just go for it.
Yeah. I think
amazing advice.
Sometimes I feel medics are like the worst enemies. Like they just put you off things, and like it's, I don't want to say toxic culture, but you know, they're not conducive to careers at times, let's say.
Yeah.
So you kind of embark on this journey of radiology. The first question I have, and it's a personal question, is how on earth do you learn all the anatomy in the body and the pathology? Like, it's crazy. Like, you know, like when I see reports, I'm thinking, like, how did I do it? What's the structure? What's the flow? Like, tell us a bit about that, and then we're going to go back to your journey.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when you start with radiology, you're like a medical student. You are completely useless. Like, you know, like you started as, you know, your training in A&E. You can do stuff. You can put in a cannula. You can see patients. In radiology, you can do nothing. So you start, and then you just start scrolling through some scans, and you're like, "That's a brain, okay." And no one expects you to do anything either. So you have a lot of time to learn. There are quite a lot of exams. So then, well, actually, there were when I did them. I think they've changed. Actually, I think there are now 2 big exams. When I did them, there were like, I think, like an exam in your first year, 6 exams. And then a final exit exam that had 3 parts. So basically, the way you learn is because you keep doing exams. Okay, you have to revise for the exams. So you get there, and everyone gets there.
No, that's incredible. I imagine there's a structure, there is a flow. Yeah. The one thing I've learned, despite what people say about training, when it works well. Yeah. Especially in this country, yeah.
Exactly. Radiology, definitely. People, you know, everyone learned in that way. So, you know, the training is really structured in that way. Or certainly was for me, actually. I don't know. It'd be interesting to speak to radiology trainees now to see how they feel their training is. But I imagine they feel probably it's more structured than, you know, surgeons, for example, have a really difficult time of training because they have to get theatre time in, and that's not really accounted for. Radiology, in some ways, is a little easier. It's a little bit more structured, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it may be the reason as to why it's super popular. And I think radiologists, other than trying to get a scan done, have the least problems with everyone else in the hospital. They seem like a good bunch. But the follow-on question was, at what point in your career do you start diversifying, start doing things outside of medicine? Not necessarily outside of medicine, but outside of the day job.
So I think so radiology training is 5 years. And so about halfway through, or I think I'd finished like one big set of exams, I did start to realise that I couldn't imagine myself just doing this job. And I quite liked looking at problems. I was drawn to radiology because I like problem solving, but I did like the idea of looking at problems at scale. And so when I was in my 4th year of radiology training, I started doing a master's in health economics at the LSE. It was like a 2-year master's program. So I did that at the same time, which was quite a lot of work, but it really helped to expand my horizons. I started just understanding how health systems works, how health economics works, how you just look at, you know, value-based pricing, just all of these things that I had no idea about. And so I always knew that when I would do the job I wanted to do in the end, I didn't know what it was, but I wanted to solve problems at scale. And so when I finished my radiology training, I had a hybrid job. So I was a consultant at UCLH. So I did that job for 3 days a week. And for 2 days a week, I did policy work. So I worked at NHS Digital and at the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges looking at strategic stuff to do with digital health. And that helped with my health economics masters. That was the kind of thing that spurred that on.
So just kind of for the listeners, when you talk about health policy, what does it actually mean? Because as far as the standard medic, they know get through training as quickly as possible, reg, consultant, 9 to 5 with a bit of practice, private practice on the side. Now you've thrown in words like health policy. What on earth does that mean? Playing the devil's advocate.
That's a good question, Abdul. Who knows? So I think it's just about making system level decisions. So, you know, what kind of system level decisions should you make? So, you know, if you want to improve the structure of how data flows in the NHS, for example, you'll have to think of that not just in your hospital, but you're going to have to think about that across, you know, all 200 or so NHS hospital trusts, across all the CCGs, across all of the, you know, the GP practices. But so, you know, policy is just about looking at the health system as a whole. In the UK, you have a number of organisations, so it can get really confusing. Probably the big one that everyone knows is NHS England. So that's the organisation through which, you know, a lot of the money is funneled, and that makes a lot of the policies and decisions that then filter down to like hospitals or primary care. So I was working in that space. And I found it valuable, but I think it wasn't really for me in the end. I wanted something that was a bit more fast paced and where I could see the results of change and iteration very quickly, which isn't really what happens. You know, you just can't physically do that at a policy level. It would be unsafe. So that's when, you know, so it was around that same time that we, you know, started thinking about creating HexaRad.
Yeah. And so, yeah, go on.
Yeah, so that's what I want to know now. So now that you've unearthed yourself a little bit more, you've discovered more about yourself, what you like and what you don't like, how does HexaRad come about? Tell us about that journey.
So actually the idea for HexaRad came when I was finishing off my radiology training, and there were 4 of us who worked together, who are co-founders, and we're all really good friends, and we all could see this problem of it didn't matter how hard we worked, there were just still delays in getting patients diagnosed. So that's quite a frustrating thing, first of all. And the reason why that is because just the volume of scans is increasing exponentially. The nature of medicine has changed, you know, people are more chronically ill, but the number of radiologists, you know, hasn't really changed. It was growing, but not growing at pace. So we wanted to solve that problem, this supply-demand mismatch. But at the time, it was in the mid, you know, it was like 2015, 16, around that time we were thinking about it. And there was all this excitement about tech and AI and you know, what it could do. And we were really excited about that too, but we felt like something was missing from that dialogue. And I think, Abdul, coming back to your point, like technology just isn't enough. Like, it's great healthcare is about great people. And what we really liked when we were training together was we worked as, you know, we were friends, but there was a real community feel within our radiologist like training cohort, just across all the registrars. And we could see that, you know, that was a great place to work, but it just meant that you had really good outcomes for patients. And if you zoom out and you look at healthcare, just, you know, whether that's a small rural clinic in like Bangladesh, or you're talking about a big, you know, hospital on like the east coast of the US, community and teamwork makes great healthcare. And any technology you build should always be focusing on that. How can you get people to do the best job that you can? So that, you know, led us to create HexaRad. And our mission at HexaRad is fast and accurate diagnosis for everyone, everywhere. And so we built a tech platform, and, you know, that's built to help us achieve our mission. But it really is about empowering people to do the best job they can in a community where they feel nurtured.
A common question that we always get from a lot of our listeners, because a lot of our listeners are medics and they want to go beyond borders, is taking an idea to market. If you can take us through the first few steps of, you know, when the idea pops into your head, how do you then actually go about building this whole astronomical platform now?
So I think I was at this conference in San Francisco last week, actually, and someone said something really great, which is be obsessed with your market, not your product. So when we first, so, you know, and what that means is really, really understand your problem and understand the market. The product will change. So if you have your hat on this idea of like, this is the thing I want to build, and you only think about that, you will just lose sight of opportunity. And so when we first started, we knew there was this problem, but, you know, Was our idea the platform that we've got now? No, it wasn't. It was, can we just build something where we start helping to have a platform that radiologists can report scans? And, let's just start with that. So that's what we started. And we got a partnership early on with Alliance Medical, which is a scanning company. Found one of our early mentors, who's now chairman of our board, who was amazing, Charles Niehaus. So he really supported us, kind of gave that courage. So what I'd say to anyone thinking about it is just really, really understand the market, like the problem you're trying to solve. Your solution will change, so keep iterating and just go for it. You can spend ages like thinking about it, but the best thing to do is just start. Reid Hoffman, who is this famous entrepreneur, is the founder of LinkedIn. He has this really great thing where he says, your first product, your MVP, should be embarrassing, because if it's not embarrassing, it means you waited too long. You should build it, get feedback, change, and then just keep going like that. Like don't spend too long in your head or just planning for perfection, which is what medics do, right? They want everything to be perfect, but you just have to go for it.
Alex talks about kind of the idea to concept to market. Tell us a bit more about Farzana, the medic turned CEO, co-founder, entrepreneur. How does that happen? How did you change as an individual person?
And in medicine, really actually do carry through really well to entrepreneurship. So, and actually I think I wrote a piece about this, but a really good example of this is, like your first day as a junior doctor, my first day, like being on call, right? It was like day 2 or something. And, you're given this bleep and you're just so terrified. And you walk in, you're just like, oh God. And it's just, and then actually all I remember is chaos, that really sick patients. And so you really are just taking some of the basic things that you learn in medical school, but really you're having to think on your feet, you're having to adapt, you're having to learn a whole bunch of new skills really, really, really quickly. That is what entrepreneurship is. So actually, as junior doctors, we are perfectly trained for it, because when you start in a hospital, no one gives you any training, right? Sometimes you might even start, they're not even giving you a freaking password. Yeah. So in fact, that kind of, being able to absorb information really quickly and make decisions and think on your feet and, not break down, in a big mess on the hospital floor. That is really good training for being an entrepreneur. So I think medicine, probably more than other careers, really does help you get there. It gives you confidence, right, to walk into a new situation. And then I've taken lots of the lessons I learned. So, that community aspect is a really important part of what we do at HexaRad. We're very values-led. So, the values, I guess, are the things that we think are important for company culture. So, teamwork, we've got 6. And we build, when we hire staff, whatever we do, we always come back to that company culture and those values, because when we were doctors, we saw that even though you don't really talk about culture in the NHS and you don't really make a concerted effort to do it, if you work in a good hospital, it's just there. Everybody knows what they're doing and why. There is just a degree of integrity and always thinking about patients that we wanted to take into the kind of the business world. And what's really funny is now there's lots of conversations having about how important that is. But in healthcare, we already know that that's important. That's how we work. So when you do that and you incentivize people and you motivate people, then your people, do the best job that they can, which is kind of what you see when you're a doctor as well.
No, definitely. And the following question from that is, how are you finding navigating the space as an ethnic minority, as a female, leading this kind of tech-driven solution in healthcare, which, funnily enough, a lot of the products until recently were founded by non-clinical individuals? How is operating in that space? Yeah,
a few things. So I think from a clinical perspective, it definitely, it means you really, it's that kind of be, obsessed about your market. Like you understand intuitively, you just have all this knowledge about the problems that exist, from a very, very specific micro level, because you've been there. So that's been really, really helpful. And I think it's much easier to learn the business stuff than it is the clinical stuff, but I would say that. So, so I think, being a subject matter expert on that gives all of your listeners who want to build something in the space that they know they've got this huge advantage, right? Coming back, like being a woman and an ethnic minority, it can be really hard actually. So I've got amazing co-founders who are really, really supportive, and they're some of my closest friends, and they really give me when I come across times of discrimination, which I'll tell you I do. I think it's that network of people around you who are just like, just ignore it. What do they know? But it is really hard. Yeah, for sure. It's really, really hard. Because I think, as probably many of your listeners know, there is a lot of talk about, opportunities and, initiatives, but invariably you just come across, prejudice, and your only option is just to keep on going.
Yeah. I always think of, there's loads of initiatives, but how much of that actually translates to real life, practical times and situations. But really glad to know that you do have a supportive network. And before I'm asking this question, the second question is, there's always this concept of, don't found a company with friends, don't found a company with people you're close to or work colleagues, just in case things go wrong, as I'm sure all starts to be exposed to conflict. What are your thoughts on that? Or if you've ever read that before, kind of found it, you just kind of ended up finding it with your close friends?
Well, I think we've become closer through being founders, actually. So that's a good point.
Okay.
We weren't like best friends when we started, but we were all friends.
Okay.
The four of us who founded the company, myself, Amy, Sam and Jay, and then Tim, who's our CTO, joined after we founded, but in essence, he's like a late stage founder. So I guess in many ways that is the case. So a few of us were like, Amy and I were really good friends. Sam and Jay were friends. Sam and Tim have been friends, but we weren't all like a big circle of friends.
Okay,
so
fine.
that is true. But I think it's just like any relationship. I think being like and we've got, a larger number of co-founders than most people, which helps us quite a lot, but it's just like, it's like a marriage, isn't it? It's any relationship. It's just clear communication, making sure you're all completely aligned about what you're trying to do. And when it goes wrong, to just learn and not blame each other.
Yeah.
So I've certainly found it a really rewarding journey, but I think you have to be very careful about who you do pick as your founder. You end up speaking to them more than you will most of your closest friends, more than some of your family. I mean, there are some days where I speak to them more than I speak to my husband. So you definitely need, I'm sure you guys probably.
I know that, yeah. I'm just hoping my wife doesn't hear it, but yeah.
Was it ours again?
Literally that.
Yeah.
I recently had a party for my son, and actually all of the others came with all of their other halves, and we've all met each other's other halves, right? But it's the first time we've come with all the children, and it was really funny because all the other halves know, like, even though that everyone knows everything that's going on at all times. Yeah. When they get home. Yeah. So I think it just depends. I mean, your question about I think finding people who are passionate, can add something. So be very clear about what the skill set is that, people are adding. Be very clear about what you want to achieve. I think that can often be the thing that, because in the beginning, as you guys have probably seen, starting something is really hard. It's a lot of it's a bit of drudge work, keep on going. You might not get any, in your case, listeners, but if you don't start, you'll never get there. But you both need to be on the same page about how much work you want to commit.
Definitely.
Absolutely. In terms of HexaRad now, so I was looking at the website, looking at the platform, very beautiful. You can see a lot of hard work and effort has gone into it. But one thing I know about the health tech environment, the med tech environment, is how much red tape there is and how difficult it is to get a product like that into an NHS system, into our health system. Talk to us about the first steps, the first days of how you got your product and how you shipped it and how you got your first customer. I think everyone loves to hear how you got your first customer.
Yeah, so our first customer actually was Alliance Medical. So they're a scanning provider, but they scan across, they're the largest scanning provider in Europe. So they scan across the majority of the NHS. And so we managed to get a meeting with them, and so we had a conversation, and then we rocked up, and I think we were quite naive, but we were really enthusiastic. And so Charles, who is now our chairman, he was the one of the exec directors there, and so he met us, and so in the beginning we had a joint venture with them. So really we were working with them to build up this service so that we could facilitate getting the scans reported across their sites because they're huge. And so, but getting to that point where we launched that joint venture, which was the first step, now we're no longer a joint venture, they're just one of our, really good customers. That took nearly a year and a half of negotiations. So we had this initial conversation. They were like, you guys are great. We put some proposals together, and then we just had to keep on at it and chase it. Where are we? Where are we? And it was just all about, eyes on the prize, just keep going. It wasn't like, it would have been nice We met them. They loved us. We had a hand. Next the month after, but it wasn't that. It just required, because they were busy. They had lots of other priorities. But we were very persistent. And so I think when you say, coming back to your other question about how do you roll out across the NHS, I think it is persistence. Amy is our chief commercial officer. She's also a radiologist. So she leads that whole side of things. So she's, very thoughtful with making sure that the value that we bring is articulated to our customers. They understand exactly, why working with us is going to help them. And we're also solving a problem that is important enough for people to want to solve it. You need to get scans, the scans reported for patients. That's probably the other thing, is that if it's a problem that's not on the top priority of a decision maker's list, they just will push it back. So it's also, coming back to that product market fit, it's is it solving an absolute problem that needs to be solved? If it's a problem that will be nice to kind of be solved, that is a difficult thing to get traction for in a market where you're not going straight to a consumer, I think.
The essence or the core essence of HexaRad is essentially using tech, facilitating the manpower and the kind of the supply side to kind of report these scans that kind of overflowing and overwhelming kind of hospitals, institutions and trusts. Is that kind of the premise of how HexaRad works?
Yeah,
just for our listeners,
Yeah, so it's a radiology platform, and it's an end-to-end radiology platform. So what makes the platform special is an engine which is called Godfrey, after Godfrey Hounsfield, who's the founder. That's such
a sick name.
Yeah, a radiologist in joke. But yeah, so and what the engine does is a collection of data and algorithms that really helps to get the right scan to the right person at the right time. And so on the platform we have a network of radiologists. So if hospitals want to get their scans reported, they can do. But we've also launched software called HexaRad, which helps hospitals better manage their own resources too. So it's almost like, if you think of it as prevention and cure, you can use HexaRad to optimize everything that you already have, which is your existing resource, how you rota them, just making that as efficient as possible. And then the ReportRad, which is our reporting service, helps you when you kind of optimize all you can, but you still need more manpower to get the scans read. You can use ReportRad. So we've got a network of radiologists on the platform. And then, we're integrating some AI tools to help radiologists work faster and better as well.
So that's incredible. And the second question is a bit more business side of things. Is in essence, you have like a marketplace in terms of kind of the demand and supply, right? You get scans that needs to be reported. How did you build up that network of radiologists? Because the last thing is you get 1,000 scans that need to be done. And I imagine at the beginning, maybe you guys did the kind of the graph and did it yourselves. How did you build that thing? Yeah. And I'm saying that because there are other companies that do exist that do a similar offering.
Yeah, exactly. So you're completely right. It's this chicken and egg problem that you said, Abdul. You can't really get the scans until you have the radiologist, but you can't get the radiologist until you have the scans. Yeah. In the beginning, just to get stuff off the ground, we reported some of our scans. We had friends who, took a bit of a punt on us, said, all right, we'll join.
Yeah.
And actually, that's how we developed our tech. This allocative efficiency engine was because in the beginning, we didn't have any money. And so, when we had 5 scans and 5 radiologists, it was really easy to understand how you divide those scans. But when you suddenly got 2,000 scans and you've got 20 radiologists, how do you do that, right? And so that's when we first developed the first version of all of our workflow tools. In terms of getting radiologists, I think it really comes back to that community. That's really important for us. So, we're building this tech platform, but it's there to enable and empower people to do the best job they can. So we, are very focused on the radiologist experience. We, when they report with us, they get shares in the company. We send them a snack box every month, healthy snacks. We have in-person events and dinners and learnings. We did our first full day of CPD learning in September at Soho House. It was really nice. So it really for us is about building that community of radiologists, because when we started we thought we were these registrars at St George's in this pretty skanky registrar room, but it was really nice because we all worked together and we loved working together. So we thought, well, how can we bring that environment, that community feel to this platform idea? And so I think that's helped us, and that we've got to continue to be focused. And our radiologists are amazing. They're some of our biggest advocates. They've helped us so much. But yeah, that's the kind of the value that we're trying to do.
I was going to say, I think obviously, I don't know until you mentioned it, whereas I think with HexaRad, from the experiences that you've had, obviously it shaped you as an individual. And it's when you're reporting for HexaRad, it's like kind of the golden days, the back in the day type thing where you have that team and you all looked after each other and it's fun, right? And despite the number of scans, and I don't know if you have a HexaRad building or reporting hub where people go in and it's like they enjoy coming into work to kind of report these scans. And it's that thing they miss or they're craving, especially as medics. But I love the fact that you incorporated it. And I think maybe it's one of the reasons as to why HexaRad is successful and it continues to grow at scale.
Mm.
Yeah, I think so. We don't actually have we in the beginning, we did have a place, but most people just want to work from home.
Yeah.
So the challenge for us is how do we bring that community feel? And we're always asking ourselves that question. And I think there's always something more that we can do. So yeah, for sure. It's this continuous like iteration of how can we make the experience better? What can we do that then makes people feel valued? Because I think that is what, when I talk to like healthcare professionals who are working and are kind of leaving the NHS, a big part of it is people just saying they don't feel valued anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's just such a core part of like your human need to feel valued in what you do.
You know, I think that's so important, actually, the community factor to all and every company out there. Like you said, above money, the one thing that we want is that camaraderie, that friendship, that ability to talk to each other and confide in each other, even when we're in the low moments. So yeah, no, I really think that's so important. The fact that you're looking after the experience and building a community, it makes sense why so many people are running into radiology. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Come and join HexaRads.
Yeah. No, definitely. A few questions before we let you go, because I know you're super busy, Farzana. What does your role look like now? Are you solely running and growing HexaRad, or are you still doing clinical medicine? Because I know there always comes that difficult moment. Do you stay? Do you do a bit of both? So where are you now in that stage?
No, I'm full-time within HexaRad, actually.
Okay.
So I still have my licensed practice. I report some scans for HexaRad to maintain, my clinical skills. I don't want to lose them. But yeah, I don't do that much of it. It's just, I think it comes to a point where you know that there is, you kind of have to make that choice, right? You have to make that decision as to, do you kind of hedge your bets and try and do a bit of both, which I tried to do for a long time, or do you think, no, I believe this is going to work, so I'm going to take a punt on myself. Like the best advice I ever got was from a radiologist called Simon Walsh, who years later, when I said to him, this advice changed my life, he genuinely was like, I cannot remember, and I wish I'd followed my own advice. But he said, if you don't believe in yourself, then no one else is going to believe in you. So always believe in yourself. And that really helped me to, when I was thinking about leaving and focusing on HexaRad, that really did help me to make that decision.
No, definitely.
Absolutely.
I think you've had an incredible career to date. It seems like you've had variety, diversity, highs and lows. And I'm sure from the outside, it looks like an overnight success, but it's years and years of sticking at it, persistence. Like you mentioned with the first partnership with Alliance Medical, like I would never have thought it took a year, right? Before we end, do you have any advice for budding entrepreneurs that are clinicians or are thinking to leave? They're not too sure. They may be sitting on an idea. What can you say to them?
So you can do things simultaneously, right? You can think about your idea, do as much of it as you can. I think get as much feedback as you can. That's always really helpful. Make as many connections and networks as you can. That's always really helpful too. And that's all stuff that you can do. At some point, you may need investment, so just think about that. Like how far can you go? How far can you bootstrap? When we started, we have raised a Series A, but in the beginning we just bootstrapped, and that made it much easier for us when we went to market to raise money, because we had already shown that people would pay for our product. So if you can do that, that makes it easier. I think we're entering like a downturn now, so it is more difficult to raise money. So just think about exactly the problem that you're trying to solve. There are still pockets of money and innovation. There are some programs I think in the NHS. I didn't do them, but I know Amy did the Clinical Entrepreneurs Fellowship. I've heard really good things about that. So I think, work on your product, really understand your market. So just be open to change as well. Don't fall in love with your own product, so you don't want to change. You might iterate and you might come up with something much better.
No, definitely.
Absolutely.
That's the golden line. They always say, don't fall in love with your product. Be open to change, but fall in love with the problem.
Exactly that. Exactly. It's like you guys don't fall in love with your podcast.
I think it's too far. This is too far gone for that. But Farzana, I want to say a massive thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to kind of sit with us, share your story, share your journey. I'm sure it's inspired a lot of people. Definitely inspired us, and it's always interesting and fun for us to learn what other people are up to. And it goes to show that medicine isn't the end all be all. There's so much more you can do with medicine, and the thing we're focusing on now with medicine is we know the workforce is disgruntled. A lot of people are leaving the profession, but there are things you can do with your degree, with your experience. And I think you are a perfect example of that. You haven't forsaken healthcare, medicine, and kind of gone into banking, right? So it's a nice example. We love kind of sharing your story and bringing people like yourself onto the show.
Yeah, and that's like the case with, all my co-founders are the same. Sam, who is like our CFO, he did physics at university, then he became an oil trader, then he became a doctor.
Oh, wow.
Now he's doing HexaRad. Umang Patel is one of our non-exec directors on the board. He was a pediatrician. He still does like a day a week at Frimley, but he was one of the early team at Babylon. He's now chief clinical information officer at Microsoft. And Charles, who I've mentioned a couple of times, who's our mentor. He's an orthopedic surgeon from South Africa. He used to be Nelson Mandela's doctor. Like, he traveled the world with Nelson Mandela, stayed at the White House, did some amazing things, and then left and, kind of went into, entrepreneurship. So yeah, for sure. There are loads of opportunities as a doctor.
Oh.
We're a doctor heavy company, but yeah, with quite interesting backgrounds. So yeah.
No, definitely. That's interesting.
Amazing.
But no, thank you so much.
No worries. I love to speak to you both. Thank you for having me on.